before Officer Brent Hargrove asked Nia Caldwell to prove she belonged there. The building had already created a record neither of them could change. At 8:47 on a Tuesday evening in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Nia was inside the upscale apartment complex she managed, wearing the burgundy blouse, charcoal slacks, and black ankle boots she had worn through a long workday. Her employee identification badge still hung from its lanyard. She had returned after a tenant reported water spreading beneath a bathroom wall, and the emergency maintenance keys she needed were locked inside the leasing office. Nia pressed her master credential to the reader. The light turned green, the lock released, and somewhere inside the building's access system, her credential number and the exact time were automatically logged. A resident crossing the lobby saw her enter the restricted management area and stopped. He had moved into the complex recently and did not recognize her. Minutes later, a patrol car pulled beneath the entrance lights. Officer Brent Hargrove stepped inside in full uniform, his body camera mounted to his chest. At 39, the white officer was tall and gym-fit, with sandy blonde hair in a short side part and the controlled manner of someone accustomed to taking charge quickly. Nia had just come back toward the lobby with the maintenance keys when he approached. "Do you live here?" he asked. The question caught her attention immediately. "Now do you work here? Not where you called here?" "No," Nia said. "I manage the property." Hargrove's eyes moved from her face to the keys in her hand, then to the employee badge against her blouse. "I got a call about someone accessing a restricted management area after hours. That was me. A tenant has a water leak. I came back for the emergency keys." Nia lifted her badge enough for him to see it without stepping closer. Hargrove examined it, but did not immediately change his position. "I need you to step away from the office while I verify that." Nia glanced toward the leasing office door. She knew exactly what the electronic system behind it contained. Every authorized entry carried a credential number, employee record, door, location, and timestamp. Her access at 8:47 was not something either of them needed to debate. Still, she understood that Hargrove had arrived because someone had called police, and she was not interested in turning a verification into a confrontation. She stepped into the open lobby as instructed. "My employee information can be verified," she said. "The access system will also show that the credential I used belongs to me." "We'll get to that," Hargrove replied. His tone was controlled, but the practical balance had changed. Minutes earlier, Nia had been the person responsible for every secured management space around them. Now a police officer was deciding whether she could approach her own office. What bothered her was not that he had responded to a call. A resident had reported something unfamiliar, and checking it was understandable. What bothered her was the starting assumption embedded in his first question. He had seen a black woman carrying management keys in a secured area and asked whether she lived there before asking whether she worked there. Nia kept her voice even. "Am I being detained?" Hargrove paused only briefly. "For the moment, yes, while I determine whether you're authorized to be in that office." Nia looked directly at him. She did not argue about her job title again, and she did not repeat the explanation he had already heard. Instead, she asked the question that would define everything that followed. "What exactly are you detaining me for?" Hargrove glanced toward the locked leasing office, then back at her employee badge. "I need to determine who you actually are first." "You have my employee identification," Nia said. "If that is not enough for you, there are two independent ways to verify me right now." Hargrove kept his attention on her while the quiet lobby stretched behind them. "What ways?" "The management workstation can confirm my employee account and access credential. If you do not want me going back into the office, call the building security supervisor. He can check the same system remotely." That gave Hargrove an option that did not require surrendering control of the scene. He looked toward the leasing office, then back at Nia. "You are not going back in there until I verify this." "Fine. Call security." Nia did not repeat that she was the property manager. He had heard her. Repeating it would not make it more true. Hargrove used the contact information available through the building's posted emergency directory and began arranging the verification. Before the call connected, the elevator doors opened and a middle-aged man stepped into the lobby. He slowed when he saw Hargrove and Nia. "Officer," he said, "I am the one who called." Hargrove turned toward him. "That is the woman you saw?" "Yes." The resident pointed briefly toward the leasing area. "I saw her go through that locked door." Nia watched Hargrove carefully. The statement confirmed only what she had already admitted. Hargrove asked, You saw her entering an area she was not authorized to access? The resident hesitated. I do not know if she was authorized. Hargrove's expression changed slightly. What did you see? She had some kind of key or card. She opened the management door and went inside. Did you see her force the door? No. Did she take anything? Not that I saw. The resident looked at Nia again, then seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the direction his call had taken. I just did not recognize her. I moved in a couple of weeks ago. I was not sure whether she worked here. For the first time since Hargrove arrived, the factual basis of the call was stated without assumption. Someone unfamiliar had entered a restricted area using a credential that opened the door normally. The caller had not witnessed forced entry, theft, or any other offense, and he could not say Nia did not belong there. Nia felt the balance shift, though not enough to end the encounter. That is what I have been telling you, she said. Hargrove did not argue with her, but he did not release her yet. I still need independent confirmation that the credential belongs to you and that you are authorized for that office. Nia understood the distinction. Verification itself was not unreasonable. What mattered now was whether the information already contradicting the original suspicion would actually change the way Hargrove evaluated her. Then verify it, she said. Hargrove returned his attention to the call he had initiated. The resident stepped aside, no longer behaving like someone certain he had witnessed wrongdoing. Nia remained where Hargrove had instructed her to stand, her employee badge visible against her burgundy blouse and the emergency maintenance keys still in her hand. She was no longer waiting for him to believe her explanation. She was waiting for a system neither of them could rewrite in the moment to answer the narrower question he had chosen to keep open. After several seconds, a voice finally came through the phone. The building security supervisor was on the line. The security supervisor did not need Nia to explain who she was. After Hargrove identified himself and described the access he was trying to verify, the supervisor asked for the credential number associated with the entry. Nia read the number from her employee identification badge while Hargrove relayed it. A few seconds of keyboard noise followed. Then the supervisor said, "That credential is assigned to Nia Caldwell, Property Management." Hargrove looked at Nia, but remained silent. The supervisor continued. "It opened the leasing office at 8:47 this evening. The credential is active and authorized for that door." Hargrove asked whether the system could show previous use. Yes. Same credential, same management access level. It has been used regularly at authorized doors over the past several weeks. There was no longer anything uncertain about whether Nia belonged inside the office. The employee identification matched the electronic credential, the credential matched the access record, and the security supervisor had confirmed all of it independently. Hargrove thanked him and ended the call. For a moment, the lobby was quiet. The resident who had called police lowered his eyes and shifted his weight. Nia did not look at him. Her attention stayed on Hargrove. "You have your verification," she said. "Am I free to go?" Hargrove glanced toward the leasing office, then nodded. "Yes, you are free to go." The detention was over. Nia felt relief, but it arrived alongside something harder to dismiss. She had given Hargrove an accurate explanation almost immediately. The caller had admitted he had never known whether she worked there. Now an independent system had confirmed not only her identity, but her repeated authorized access. She could have taken the maintenance keys upstairs and tried to forget the entire encounter. Instead, she made a decision. "I want the incident number," she said. Hargrove looked back at her. "And your name and badge number, please." He provided them. Nia entered the information into her phone. Then she contacted the security supervisor herself. "Please preserve tonight's access records and the lobby camera footage beginning before the police arrived and continuing until the officer leaves." The supervisor asked whether there had been an incident. "Yes," Nia said. "I do not know yet whether I will need the records, but I do not want them overwritten under the normal retention schedule." She was not accusing Hargrove of something she could not prove. She was making sure that what had happened would remain available to verify. Hargrove heard the request, but did not interfere. The resident remained near the elevators, visibly uncomfortable, but Nia did not stop to confront him. The leaking apartment still needed attention, and she had already decided that the records mattered more than another argument. She turned toward the hallway to deal with the maintenance problem. Before leaving the lobby, she glanced at the security camera mounted above the entrance. Until that moment, She had thought the central question was whether Hargrove would accept that she was the property manager. That question had been answered. Now another mattered more. When this encounter became an official record, would that record describe the same thing the building had just witnessed? Nia made sure the evidence would still exist when someone finally compared the two. The next morning, Nia was back at the leasing office before 9, finishing the incident documentation required whenever police responded to a restricted area of the property. The water leak had been contained the night before, but the encounter in the lobby had followed her home in a way the maintenance problem had not. She requested the police incident report using the number Hargrove had provided. When she received the available report information and read the description, one phrase stopped her: an unauthorized individual accessing secured management areas. Nia read it again. That was not what the caller had actually known. He had seen someone he did not recognize use a credential to enter a locked office. When Hargrove questioned him directly, the man had admitted he did not know whether Nia worked there. He had not seen forced entry. He had not seen theft. He had not claimed to know that she was unauthorized. Yet the written description removed that uncertainty. Nia kept reading. The chronology bothered her too. The report made the independent verification of her employment appear to come near the end of a straightforward investigation into unauthorized access. That framing left little sense of how quickly the original suspicion had begun weakening once the caller clarified what he had actually observed. Nia did not immediately conclude that Hargrove had deliberately falsified anything. Memory could compress events. Reports could summarize details imperfectly. She also knew that being angry about the encounter did not prove why another person had acted as he did. But this was exactly why she had asked for the building records to be preserved. She opened the access management system and confirmed the 8:47 timestamp. Then she checked with the security supervisor and verified that the lobby footage from the relevant period had been retained. The building could document when she entered, how she entered, and much of what happened afterward. The police department controlled two other records: dispatch audio and Hargrove's body camera. Together, those sources could answer questions that memory could not. Nia wrote down what she wanted reviewed: what the caller originally reported, what Hargrove heard when he questioned the caller, when her access authorization was independently confirmed, what happened during the detention, and how those events were later described in writing. Nia kept the complaint deliberately narrow. Instead of claiming she knew what had been in Hargrove's mind, she asked the department to examine what could actually be measured: what he was told, when he was told it, and what he did after receiving that information. She requested a direct comparison of the dispatch recording, body camera footage, electronic access logs, lobby security footage, and written report on a single timeline. Before submitting it, Nia read the request once more. She was not asking anyone to accept her feelings as evidence, and she was not demanding that Hargrove lose his job. She was asking the department to determine whether its own officer's written account matched records created while the encounter was actually happening. Then she submitted the complaint. From that moment forward, the question was no longer whether Nia's memory should be trusted over Hargrove's. There were records on both sides of the encounter now, and for the first time, someone would have to compare them. When the records were finally aligned by timestamp, investigators did not discover that Nia had lied or that Hargrove had invented the entire encounter. They discovered something more useful. The disputed moments could now be measured in minutes. The caller's uncertainty came first. Nia's explanation and offer of verification followed. Her authorized access was independently confirmed after that. The preliminary timeline supported several parts of what Nia had described, but the lobby footage also showed something she had not emphasized in her complaint. During the tense exchange, after Hargrove instructed her to remain in the lobby, Nia took a step toward the leasing office doorway as she referred to the computer system that could verify her access. Hargrove immediately told her to stay where she was, and she stopped. When the supervisor later asked Nia about that moment, she did not argue with the recording. "I stepped toward the office," she said. "I was frustrated, and I was trying to show him where the verification was. I should have stayed where he told me to stay." Admitting that did not erase the rest of the timeline. In fact, it made the sequence more important. Her movement occurred after she had identified herself as the property manager and explained how her authorization could be verified. It did not occur before Hargrove approached her, and it could not explain the assumptions that had already shaped the encounter. That distinction shifted the review away from the simple question of who had behaved perfectly. Nia had not behaved perfectly, and the records did not need her to. Hargrove had been entitled to respond to the resident's call and investigate what the resident had actually reported. The harder question was how long his level of suspicion remained justified as new information arrived. Investigators marked the moment the caller admitted he did not know whether Nia worked there. They marked the moment Hargrove contacted building security. They marked the confirmation that Nia's credential belonged to an authorized property manager. For Nia, that changed the emotional weight of the complaint. She no longer needed someone to decide whether she sounded more believable than Hargrove. The timeline could test both of them, including the part where her own judgment had been imperfect. What mattered was whether Hargrove's decisions changed when the facts changed. By the end of the preliminary review, the broad outline of the encounter was no longer seriously disputed. The investigators narrowed their attention to a much smaller window. The minutes between the first information weakening the original suspicion and the moment Nia was finally told she was free to go. The review had finally reached the part Nia could not answer from her own memory, not what Hargrove had seen, but when he had stopped believing the original suspicion and whether his decisions changed when he did. The investigators asked Hargrove to explain the narrow window they had isolated, and his answer was not unreasonable on its face. He said an employee identification badge alone did not prove that the person carrying it was currently authorized to enter a restricted office, especially when he had been dispatched because a resident reported unfamiliar after-hours access. He also explained that once he began verifying the situation, he wanted Nia to remain in one location until an independent source confirmed her credentials. The supervisor reviewing the case accepted that an officer could reasonably take time to verify those facts. The problem was no longer whether Hargrove had been allowed to investigate. The problem was whether his understanding of the situation changed as contradictory information arrived. Investigators returned to his body camera recording. The caller could be heard admitting that he did not know whether Nia worked at the building and that he had seen no forced entry or theft. Minutes later, the security supervisor confirmed that Nia Caldwell was part of property management, that her credential was active, and that it had legitimately opened the leasing office at 8:47. Hargrove acknowledged that this verification resolved the access question, which was why he eventually told Nia she was free to go. But the review did not stop there. The body camera had continued recording after the detention ended. Shortly before Hargrove left the property, another patrol officer who had arrived near the end of the call briefly asked what had happened. Hargrove answered without hesitation. She checked out. Caller just did not recognize her. The sentence was casual, but its timing changed the review. Before writing his report, Hargrove already understood that the caller's suspicion had come from not recognizing Nia. That made the wording of the later written report harder to explain as a product of information Hargrove never possessed. When investigators asked why the report described the call more definitively, as involving an unauthorized individual accessing a secured management area, Hargrove said he had summarized the nature of the dispatch and the reason for his investigation. He denied intentionally changing the facts. The supervisor did not need to decide his motive at that moment. The records allowed a narrower determination. Hargrove's contemporaneous statement showed what he understood before he wrote the report, while the report showed how he characterized the same incident afterward. For Nia, learning about that body camera statement changed the complaint again. Until then, there had remained a possibility that Hargrove simply remembered the caller's words differently the next morning. Now there was evidence of what he had understood while the encounter was still fresh. It did not prove every conclusion Nia might have drawn about why he treated her with suspicion. It did establish something more concrete. The uncertainty was known to him before the official account was written. Investigators now had the dispatch recording, the caller's clarification, Nia's access timestamps, the security footage, Hargrove's body camera recording, and his written report. Each source answered a different part of the encounter. The remaining task was no longer to search for another clue. It was to place those records in exact order and determine what Hargrove knew at each point when his authority affected Nia. For the first time, there was enough evidence to make that determination. The final review did not depend on a single dramatic recording. It depended on the fact that several independent systems had preserved different pieces of the same encounter. Investigators synchronized the dispatch audio, Hargrove's body camera timestamps, the apartment complex access log, the lobby security footage, and the written police report. Once those records were placed in sequence, the central dispute became much narrower. The synchronized timeline drew a clear boundary that neither Nia's memory nor Hargrove's report had been able to establish alone. Hargrove had reasonable grounds to respond and briefly investigate. But as the caller's uncertainty became explicit and Nia's authorization was independently confirmed, the factual basis for continuing to treat her as potentially unauthorized rapidly weakened. The review also preserved the detail that complicated Nia's side. She had stepped toward the office after being instructed to remain in place. That justified Hargrove maintaining control while verification was completed, but it did not restore suspicion that earlier evidence had already undermined. The body camera recording supplied the most important confirmation of Hargrove's own understanding. After Nia had been cleared, he told another officer. She checked out. Caller just did not recognize her. That statement matched the caller's actual uncertainty. The later written report did not preserve that uncertainty with the same accuracy. Instead, its description presented the original call more definitively as involving an unauthorized individual, and its compressed chronology made the basis for Hargrove's actions appear stronger for longer than the combined records supported. The department did not conclude that every decision Hargrove made that night had been improper, nor did the review claim it could prove every thought behind his actions. It made findings based on what the evidence could establish. The investigation sustained concerns regarding the accuracy of his documentation and his handling of the detention as information undermining the original suspicion accumulated. Questions about bias were referred for supervisory assessment and remedial training rather than converted into a claim about motive the recordings could not directly prove. When Nia received notice of the findings, she read them twice. There was no triumphant feeling and no sudden sense that the encounter had been erased. What mattered was simpler. She had said the records could establish what happened, and they had. Her identity had never needed a powerful title, an influential relative, or a hidden connection to make the treatment worth examining. She had been the authorized manager of the building before Hargrove knew it, and she had deserved a fair evaluation before he confirmed it. Pending completion of the disciplinary process, Hargrove was removed from solo patrol assignments and placed under supervisory restrictions. The factual dispute was finished. Nobody needed another witness, another recording, or another explanation of who Nia Caldwell was. The remaining question was no longer what had happened in that lobby. It was what the department would do now that the answer was documented. The department's final decision arrived without spectacle. There was no public announcement, no dramatic dismissal, and no attempt to pretend that one disciplinary finding could answer every question raised by the encounter. Hargrove received a formal reprimand for the sustained documentation and detention handling concerns. He was required to complete remedial training focused on investigative detention, changing levels of reasonable suspicion, and accurate report writing. After completing that training, he would return to field work under direct supervision for a defined period, with additional review of his reports and discretionary enforcement decisions. The department stopped short of firing him. The sustained findings were serious enough to require discipline and supervision, but not broad enough to justify ending his career. That distinction mattered to Nia. Accountability that ignored inconvenient facts would have repeated the same kind of mistake she had challenged in the first place. The apartment company made a change of its own. Management approved a new after-hours verification procedure allowing security personnel to confirm authorized employees directly through the access system when emergency responders requested verification. The change would not prevent every bad assumption, but it removed unnecessary uncertainty from future encounters. When Nia received the department's written disposition, she sat at her desk in the same leasing office that had been treated as questionable territory for her only weeks earlier. She expected to feel vindicated. Instead, she felt something quieter. Hargrove had faced consequences. The report discrepancy had been formally addressed. The building had improved its verification process. None of that changed the first question he had asked when he saw her carrying management keys in a secured area. "Do you live here?" Nia understood why that question remained with her. Hargrove had not known her. He had not known her work history, her responsibilities, or how many times she had opened that same office. But unfamiliarity had become suspicion before verification had a chance to become information. She also understood something else now. Her complaint had never needed to prove that Hargrove was beyond correction. It needed to establish where his authority had outrun the facts available to him and require a consequence for it. The disciplinary decision held him accountable without pretending that ending his career was the only meaningful consequence, and Nia did not need that outcome for her dignity to be recognized. Hargrove, meanwhile, could not simply return to solo patrol and treat the review as paperwork that had passed. The reprimand remained part of his professional record. His training was mandatory. His return to ordinary duties would be observed, and the department expected the findings to affect how he handled uncertainty in future calls. Nia folded the disposition letter and returned it to the envelope. The department had answered what it intended to do about the past. What no written disposition could answer was whether any of it would matter the next time Hargrove encountered someone he did not recognize. Hargrove completed the required remedial training before returning to regular field work, and for the next several weeks his patrol decisions and written reports were reviewed by a field supervisor. The reprimand remained in his professional record, and the department documented completion of each corrective requirement before restoring him to ordinary assignments. Nothing about that process erased what had happened to Nia, but accountability had moved beyond a finding on paper. It now carried expectations that could be observed in what Hargrove did next. Several months later, he responded to a call at a commercial property in Chattanooga. An employee had reported a black delivery driver standing near a secured loading area. The employee did not recognize him and was concerned that he might not belong there. The circumstances were different from Nia's encounter, but one detail was familiar enough to matter. Suspicion had begun with unfamiliarity. Hargrove met the employee near the loading entrance. Instead of approaching the driver as though the central question had already been answered, he first asked the caller, "Did you actually see him commit an offense, or do you simply not recognize him?" The employee paused. "I just do not recognize him. I have not seen him here before." Hargrove asked whether the business was expecting a delivery. The employee was unsure, so the shipping office was contacted. Within minutes, the delivery manifest confirmed the driver's name, company, scheduled arrival, and authorization to use that loading area. Hargrove thanked the driver for waiting while the information was checked and cleared the call. There was no extended detention, no argument, and no dramatic moment when everyone suddenly understood what had almost happened. The driver completed his delivery and continued with his day. He never knew about Nia Caldwell. Nia never learned about him. Later, during Hargrove's supervised performance review, the handling of that call was noted as an example of the corrective approach his training had emphasized. Separate what a witness actually observed from what the witness assumed, then verify before allowing uncertainty to harden into accusation. That entry was small compared with the disciplinary documents that had preceded it, but in one sense it was the most tangible consequence of them. Hargrove still carried police authority. The difference was visible in how he exercised it. Months earlier, Nia had preserved electronic records because she wanted one evening described accurately. She had no way of knowing that the consequences would eventually reach a stranger she would never meet. She did not receive an award for it. There was no public ceremony, no apology staged in front of cameras, and no moment when Hargrove returned to the apartment complex seeking forgiveness. Her life simply continued. She managed the same building, carried the same employee identification, and opened the same secured doors with the same credential. What had changed was not her right to belong there. That had existed from the beginning. What changed was that one institution had been forced to examine how quickly uncertainty could become suspicion when authority moved faster than verification. Perhaps the quieter meaning of Nia's experience lives in the moments before certainty arrives. It is easy to treat someone fairly after every credential has been checked and every question answered. The harder test comes when a person is unfamiliar and someone with authority must decide whether unfamiliar means suspicious. Accountability can appear in a reprimand, a corrected procedure, or a permanent record, but sometimes its most meaningful consequence is almost invisible. The next person is treated differently. Nia never needed a powerful title or an influential connection to make what happened to her matter. Her decision to preserve the truth simply gave other people a chance to examine an assumption before it became someone else's burden. She never knew about the driver Hargrove later encountered, and perhaps that makes the outcome more meaningful. The change mattered even when there was nobody there to applaud it. If you had been in Nia's position, how would you have balanced protecting yourself, preserving the evidence, and deciding what kind of accountability to pursue? What part of her choice, or Hargrove's later change in behavior, stayed with you most?